NZXT Cam. Monitor your games while playing. To learn more about it, check out the description. Hey everyone, it is the Angry Honey Badger here, and it's time to take a look at the tier list for patch 6.8. Now, before we dive into where all the champions are falling, one thing I noticed, people occasionally reference other tier lists because yada yada, yours is off, yada yada. So I went around and I looked at a few tier lists, and not all of them, but most of them that I saw were almost 100% based off of just win rates, which, if you want to just base a tier list on win rates, then just go look at any win rate on any other random league sites. Although they do vary depending on which leagues they're pulling from, which regions they're pulling from, and so on and so forth. So take that with a grain of salt if you're looking at that. I'd stick with plat and up if you're going to be looking at win percentages. I would not go any lower than that per se. So I don't really consider those tier lists personally. That's just what people are winning or losing with, and one thing I feel is those can be very, very badly recognized or represented mostly because somebody can stream something, a pro can stream something crazy, do it in a really weird way and win with it, and he can influence thousands of people that will influence thousands more to play it because they thought it was good. And not that it can't win, it's just not as strong as it was once seen by a pro playing it. And so that can actually have a lot of influence in some cases on win percentages, let alone some of the best champions in the past had the worst win rates ever, but have always been good champions. The other thing I want to talk about before we dive into the list is this last patch, despite it changing some champions for the better and for the worse, mostly just nerfing some things that needed to be nerfed, Tank Echo for one, and just some other changes. Not a lot happened, so the list looks somewhat similar to patch 6.7, but there are changes. I will go over some of them. We'll talk about just some generalities as well, and we'll see where the things are happening. So let's go ahead and jump into the S tier. Here we are. Not actually a lot has changed up here. For the most part, we can see that Tank Echo's gone. I think it's one of the bigger ones. But besides that, I didn't really feel like moving anybody really around too much. I'm really content with most of these champions. Not a lot of changes have happened to any of these champions in negative ways or positive ways, or really have changes happen to champions below them to bump them up here. The most notable changes are I did put an extra person in top lane, and I added Maokai and Trundle. We're going to talk about Trundle in this. Realistically, I think Trundle holds a lot of weight also in the bot lane too. I know I don't list where a champion can be played in every role because that would be ridiculous and things would start to fill up like astronomically fast because you could, in theory, justify almost any position for any champion. But this is where I think they're at their best, or at least they're on par at this point in their other roles. So Trundle is getting moved up to the top because his ultimate is still so damn impactful with the amount of tanks we have been seeing. It makes him a very, very good just champion to have on your team for any specific reason. It's just that. Also, he does fine in the lane. He has a very good passive to help him stay in lane because he gets all that health back. So Trundle's finding himself up here. So is Maokai. Maokai, after he got his buffs a couple patches ago, he's seen more prominence in play, and he's been doing quite a good job at it. And yeah, so that's mostly S tier. Not a lot has changed. The other part we're going to talk about is the supports, Braum, Soraka, and Karma. Now, when I highlight a whole section for supports, it's kind of like what I did last time with the mid laners. We haven't actually seen a lot of changes of any kind come to a lot of support champions in the previous patches. We saw some changes to Karma, and she's been being played mid more, but I think she's still really strong in bot lane, and she's been showing us that she is. But not a lot of changes just at all have been hitting support. Is that because Rito doesn't know what to do with the support champions? I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think the supports right now are just in a general good spot, and they have good items that were introduced at the beginning of this season, and I think overall they're just in a decent spot. You might argue that obviously some of them aren't as good as others, but that's always going to be the case. But I think the majority of them all fall in about A to S tier. So I think supports are actually in a good spot right now. If you're looking for a new role to play, no, a lot of people don't like to play support. I think it actually can be quite fun because you control a lot of what your team does based on vision And if you actually, as a support, as long as you're not terrible at it, you can actually dictate in chat what you should do next as a team, because you're the thinker for the team. They're there to kill stuff. You're there to set things up and let everybody know what we should be doing. You have that power if you can show that you are a good support, and teams will fall in line and get behind it if you have good shot calling. So another reason why maybe trying them out, since they're in a good spot, is a good idea. Moving things on to the A tier, though, we're going to talk about Rumble and Echo. Now, let's talk about Rumble first, because I mentioned him. Rumble hasn't. I didn't actually think I moved him. I was tempted to move him into the jungle because he's going to be seeing a little bit more play there based on the changes that they made to him, with his equalizer cooldown coming down by 10 seconds on the previous patch, and him being able to do full damage to minions with his Flame Spitter. That's going to help him with jungle clear, and it'll help him with clearing lanes too, but for the most part, that definitely helps out his jungle, which we've seen more often this season. I'm going to be keeping an eye on him closely to see where he's going to be in the future. I've always had mad respect for Rumble and his damage potential. Some people think I over-justify it or over-recognize it. I disagree completely. One equalizer in the middle of the game, even if you're slightly behind as Rumble, completely turns the game on its head. He's just an insanely impactful champion. He's just got a higher skill curve to get to play at that higher level. But for the most part, if you learn him fairly well and balance your heat and your equalizer placement, you're going to be a very impactful player. So Rumble, very, very good right now. Next is Echo. Echo came down from top lane tank S tier. Now he's in A tier as a mid laner. I previously had him as a mid laner. I'm moving him back here for now because I don't think Tank Echo's ever going to disappear. It was a thing before people realized how strong it was and after tweaks and buffs to him. But with the increased AP ratios he now has, I think he's going to be an even better mid laner, or at least damage Echo will be a better source for people to try out. So I'm moving him back into the A tier, and he's not actually in a bad spot in it. I don't know if we'll see him rise or fall. I got to keep an eye on him. I don't want to nerf him completely down after the changes, but I actually think he could be quite good, and maybe he'll even sneak back up into S tier as a mage with his AP damage. It's pretty good, to be completely honest, if you didn't know. So if you want to switch over from tank to AP Echo, now would be a good time to do so, and I recommend trying it out. Next up is the B tier. We're going to talk about Xin Zhao and Jinx within this tier. Moved a couple champions around, moved a couple champions out of this down into C tier. A couple more champions have joined C tier. I know a couple people, just real fast, complained about there's a lot of champions in A and B, moved more into C. I thought about that and I was like, maybe I will. And then I was like, no, they don't deserve it. The game is balanced fairly well. That's why a lot of champions fall in A to B. I don't need to move champions into C just because you think there's too many within these two groups. No, there's a lot of champions in these two groups because that's where a majority of the champions fall. That's just how it works. So I don't need to move more down, although I did because I think a couple did need moving down. But no, I don't need to have equal amounts in each tier because that's not how the game's power is actually broken up. If you look at like professional play, every single champion was played last split except for one, and that's Alawi, who actually is in... Is it the next tier? Who is in C tier? But other than that, unless Alawi did eventually sneak in, but up through the first like 10 weeks, Alawi was the only one who hadn't been played. Every other champion had found a way in. That just shows how close the meta and team comps work currently. So don't need to move champions down just because the tier list seems unbalanced. But going back to these two champions, Xin Zhao and Jinx, Xin Zhao is... he's fallen down here a little bit. Mostly he had his prominence and his rise when he got buffed, but then they nerfed him immediately. And also I think Sated's just less helpful nowadays. A lot of Sated junglers fall in B tier just because they're very, very inconsistent champions. That's one reason why they are in the B tier. And the next champion also in the B tier is Jinx, and Jinx is in the same kind of spot. She's been falling down now. Granted, she didn't necessarily get a nerf on this recent patch, but she's just kind of been falling out of favor for other ADCs during this whole season. I don't think she's still terrible, and I actually felt a little bad putting her here in B. Although this isn't a bad spot to be, it's still viable, but she's just fallen down a little bit. She hasn't seen any buffs back up from the beginning of the season when they did initially nerf her, and because of that, other ADCs have been seeing better prominence and buffs to others, such as Miss Fortune, Sivir, Who else? I mean, Kog'Maw even got buffed back up, and he's back up one more. So there's other ADCs that are just way more viable, but before Jinx is probably a choice you'd want to pick. She just needs a little bit of attention from Riot, maybe just some small changes, maybe even some changes to the meta might get her back in. But for now, she's going to be sitting here in the B tier. Moving things on to the C tier, this is the tier I added a couple champions to, and I moved champions around in here a little bit. I think that right now, most of these champions, you can understand why they're here. The Amumu one I moved down in here, I kind of felt a little bad about that one too, but I haven't seen as much prominence from him, although his win rate's fine. But once again, this list isn't a win rate list. If you want that, go check out a win rate from pretty much any league site. But for the most part, these champions, it's not that you can't win with them or do good things with them. They just need some help in a few ways, and I don't think anybody would really argue that a few of these champions could get some really small buffs, and that would definitely help them out. I don't think anybody's going to jump in here and be like, oh, blah, 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 this is super OP. What are you talking about? How are they in the C tier? No. All these champions could use a little bit of help, and that would get them, further up the list. Although, that being said, I know I moved Galio up within the C tier, and he does have a super high win rate right now, but once again, not a win rate tier list, and doesn't always fit teams. And moving things on finally to the F tier, I have placed Taric in here for now. As you know, if you've been watching tier lists for a while now, I always move a champion who just got a rework or released down into the difficult to place area because we need more time to see what is going to happen with that champion. Also, they typically get nerfed or buffed the next patch. So we're going to keep an eye on him, and we've been keeping an eye on Teemo and Mordekaiser, and we will continue to do so. But that is going to be the tier list for patch 6.8. I hope it's everything you ever wanted and so much more, but it probably isn't, and I'll probably hear about it in the comments below, which you can go ahead and do so. If you leave something constructive or have real-life questions, I will try to answer them if they make sense. I wish you all the very best of luck this week playing League of Legends, and I'll see you all later.